Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs and share our experience to hopefully help you have your best game. There we go. We are recording. Hello, James. How are you?
Hello, Jeremy. Doing very well.
Now that you're not passed out anymore.
Correct.
That's pretty good. I was just harping on him a little bit because I have a vested interest in his health, because I have a vested interest in my daughter. So that's cool. That's good stuff. All right. Glad you're feeling better.
Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. So we're going to talk today. You had brought up a great question. Why don't you go ahead and intro it and talk me through it as to like the perspective you're coming at it from and what we can do with it here today.
Yeah, so the main question for me is actually, and I think this will go really well with where I am in the gaming journey that I'm about to be going on to, is actual like session and adventure prep.
Right.
Because I am getting ready to run my first real full session of Traveler this Friday. Woo-hoo. So I'm actually getting ready to, on your suggestion, attempt high and dry.
Yes.
With my players. So
wait, real quick, interject. Yeah. Did you watch Seth Sirkowski's or Skorkowski's or whatever his stuff?
I did. I watched all of 12 of his Traveler prep videos and his high and dry videos.
Isn't it handy that your wife is getting a master's degree now and is busy and works evenings sometimes, that you have this? This is so convenient.
Yes, it's really nice. And it's nice that I have an hour of lunch at work that when I want to sit down and crank out 2 30-minute videos while I'm eating my sandwich, I have the perfect time to do it.
What do you think of his stuff?
I think his stuff's really good. There are some, like you said, there are some things in there that I'm like, oh, I don't necessarily want to do that. But the way that he thinks about adventures and the way that he explains the system is really helpful. It helped me a ton with understanding. Actually, as soon as I watched his first episode on character creation, I was like, oh, I messed all of that up when I did it the first time, but it's all going to work out. We're going to have fun with it.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, we'll put links to not only those traveler playlist, but Seth's YouTube channel in the links. So you're talking session prep and adventure prep, which are in my mind, in terms of definitions, aren't the same thing, but they're obviously related.
Correct.
So how do you? Let's make sure that we're on the same page in terms of definitions. When you say session versus adventure, because that's where I see a separation.
Yeah. So when I'm thinking the differences here is I see kind of like 3 tiers of prep. So there's like campaign prep, which is the overarching, like, where do we want this like whole story to go? Do we want character development? All that kind of stuff. Adventure prep is more like we're talking about high and dry. So that whole thing of high and dry, the whole thing would be an adventure, which an adventure could be one session, but more often than not, adventures are usually several. And I feel like that's going to be the way it is with high and dry. And then a session would be an individual like session of sitting down with your players, which might be so far into a published adventure, but not necessarily the whole adventure itself.
Okay, that's exactly what I was thinking too. So I'm going to set aside campaign prep because you asked initially about, and we said we were going to talk about session versus adventure.
And I think campaign would be too big anyways to do anything like, even it would need its own standalone. So I think that would be better.
Oh yeah. So we'll put that one aside. So session and adventure, obviously, an adventure is a chapter in a book or a single coherent story that has a beginning, middle, and end. If we want, that kind of very workable and typical structure. And then a session is just however much time that you get together with your friends and you do your thing. Okay. I look at this differently, whether I'm using a published adventure or am I using pre-written materials or not? So you're using pre-written materials. You're using high and dry, which I'll definitely put a link to Seth's overview of that module in the notes, because if you're ever thinking about playing Traveler, it's such a great on-ramp. But anyway, here's what I recommend. that one is not that long. Like
Mm-hmm.
physically, the page count, it's really not that long. When it comes to a published module, okay, or adventure, I'll use those terms interchangeably. I And unless it's something really long, like if I were playing 5e and I was going to run like Rime of the Frost Maiden, um, obviously it would make sense for me to read the whole bloody book in advance, but it's big.
Right.
Um, but I guess maybe that's my first piece of advice. Actually, if it is a published adventure, you should probably read the whole thing all the way through. And given the fact that High and Dry is just a single module that probably will take place over a few sessions, it won't take you that long to read. But I would read it. And then what I would do is for each section, discernible section within the book that's laid out in the table of contents, I would take notes. Like it sounds crazy to treat a hobby like a class, but you know how to do that. Like I know because of your academic background, like how to read a book, read an essay and extract key points, things you might forget, write questions about it, things like that. I would actually treat it like that. And I would do that first. Because sometimes I don't know if you've ever run a published adventure for D&D that something comes up 10 pages beyond what you read and you're like, oh, I really wish I'd have known that in advance so I could have foreshadowed it.
Mm-hmm.
And High and Dry has, like any published adventure, has a couple of things in it that when I was reading it, by the time I got to the end, I was like, oh, I want to change or tweak this thing in like the third act, I say figuratively. And so I need to approach that differently in terms of foreshadowing earlier in the story. So I think you need to read the whole thing first and take
And that's
notes
what
on it.
Yeah, that's what actually I have read the whole module
Cool.
as kind of like prep for this session, but I didn't take notes. That's something that
Yeah.
I'll probably want to go back and do again closer to the session. That way I have my notes there. But I agree, that's when I was reading through and listening to some of Seth's suggestions, that was one of the things he suggested. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm really glad I've already read the module and know what he's talking about, because that is something I want to do in my session, because that's going to be a pretty big plot point
Yeah.
if they can use that.
Yeah. And when it comes to taking notes, the first thing I would do is just make whatever sloppy form of like Harvard outline.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just, the first thing I think you need to nail down is the sequence of events, because I mean it is a plot driven adventure. They get a job, they go to this place, they get there, there's a little wrinkle because they find out that the other crew were scumbags, and then they find out that there's a little bit of a stitch in them, or a hitch in them finding the ship. Then they have to go out and get it, and then they have the whole thing with the volcano, and they get to be big damn heroes and that kind of thing. I would just, for the sake of putting it in your memory, just make an outline of it, and then go through and think about, all right, the next thing I think of when after I've got an outline is, what are the transition points, like as the plot moves from scene to scene, from place to place. And in a traditional adventure like what Mongoose pumps out, like they don't approach it in terms of terminology from the like scenes and acts, that kind of like a cinematic approach. But think about it from that perspective. Like when they get to the downport, which in Traveler language is the starport that's on the planet. When they get to the downport on Walston, that's a scene, and when they deal with some of the locals and they recognize that, like, okay, we're not going to speak well of, or we have to make sure that we differentiate ourselves from the other crew. Then you have that transition where they have an opportunity to go meet some of the government officials, and then they get told where the ship is. Hey, if you'll do us a favor, we'll tell you where it is, that kind of thing. That's a transition point. And when the players are faced with decisions about where to go within the story, that's when things can either move forward as the way that you anticipated them or go off in left field. And so I try to pay more attention to those rather than just like, okay, you're kind of rattling around within this scene. What decisions might they or do they need to make in that scene in order to move them to the next step? That's where I'd put in
Okay.
my like after you've got the idea of like, okay, this is the overall the sequence of the thing, then it's where are those transition points so that I can make sure that the story moves forward. And to be honest, it's like a story like this, an adventure like that is it's a great introduction to some of the major tropes of Traveler, as well as the system. Um, and uh, and so I think it's perfectly okay to treat it as a plot-driven adventure. It doesn't have to be the steepled fingers. Well, what do you want to do, Mister Player?
Right.
Like you're driving the story with the plot. That doesn't mean smacking them and making them like, you will do this, you will act in this manner, but guiding them to follow said plot and stay in a general lane. Um, in an adventure like this, I would put thought toward, okay, what knowing my players, what kinds of things might they do based on how I'm going to present this, and how can I guide them gently to move in this general direction within the plot?
And that's one of the things that with this kind of I've noticed in reading through and thinking of my players. I can kind of see them taking like one of three paths, at least once they reach the planet of Volston. It's going to be a very like, do they take the easy path? Do they take the hard path? Or do they take something down the middle? And that's where I'm kind of having like, do I plan that out? Like, if they're going to take the easy path, there will be these things. And by that, I mean, like, do they take the path where they're following the rules and going to people and being very agreeable, which they might be that given day, or as all of them have tended to be in other games, might they decide that they're going to be the murder hoboing like travelers that are
Right.
out there and choose the path of most resistance
The
and
path of most
therefore,
violence.
yeah,
Uh,
having to deal with that. But how much like do I prep for that, or do I just like kind of know in the back of my head this is kind of going to be the outcomes if they choose those, and then let them make their decisions and kind of come up with that on the fly?
I think it because this is the first time you're running Traveler and this is the first time they're playing it. This is as much a an adventure to play and have fun in and work through, and a time for you and your friends to come together and do that. It's also as much an introduction for all of you to what Traveler has to offer, or at least some slivers of what Traveler has to offer. So, what are some of your characters? Was anyone a scout?
Yes.
Okay.
So just to kind of give you the quick and dirty background on them, one was a Navy pilot who then ended up becoming a pirate in his last part of his career.
Well, and pirate has a broad definition. One
Yeah.
person's
So
pirates, another person's privateers, another person's merchant.
exactly. And then we have one who was a civilian engineer and scientist,
Okay.
is his full background. One worked as a planetary like investigative agent for the police force for his entire background. And then our most, I think, most interesting in terms of background character, what has been all over the place. He started as an agent, he ended up in the scout services, and then ended up working in civilian like industry as
Okay.
the end of his career. And he's the one that's kind of going to be my catalyst of bringing them into
Yeah.
the adventure because he was in the scout service.
Okay. What I might do for what I might do if I were you is I might, and I wouldn't write more than like a post-it note or a maybe a 3x5 card. Like, here's a little bit of information your character would know, like the scouts, something about how, and the Navy guy would know this also. Every planet has its own laws. Every planet has its, like, once you're, as I said this, last time we talked, once you're inside like, once you're within the atmosphere or on a high port in orbit around a planet, like, it's that planet's laws. And so your scout would be very aware, and your Navy veteran would be very aware that every planet's got its own thing. And so when you go into a new planet, you want to make sure that you like recognize, like, hey, what's it like here? What's the dealio? Um, the whole UPP, the universal planetary profile that exists for and the law level and government type. This is a great opportunity. Maybe even like you can. The Traveler Wiki is a monster. Okay, have you looked at? Okay,
I have looked at some of it.
excellent. And then the Traveler map is also a monster. And every single planet, if you go to Walston on the Traveler map, you can click on it. It'll take you to the Traveler Wiki. It'll show you what its government type, all that kind of stuff. That can be actually an opportunity. I would do this beforehand. Maybe those players, like you send them something, just send them a little email that has a link in it. Hey, your player would know this in general. Or maybe you find off the Traveler Wiki like a short article about law levels and government types. If you have a player who's inclined to say, I'll spend 15 or 20 minutes before a session doing a little bit of reading, but I would write on, and then, even the investigator, like that it's, yeah, I would provide some of them with that bit of information. And I would tell everyone that too, just to be certain.
Right. And that's where you'll also know, like, it's going to be very interesting because my investigator is also a Varger. So that will make this session very interesting as well, because he's also the most inclined to be the most generally flamboyant personality in the party.
Okay.
So that will be
You did read about
fun.
you did read
I
about
did.
okay.
Yes.
Now, I'll give you a little bit of advice. A friend of mine, I think you've met him anyway, but anyway, he's run this adventure before too, and he treats the whole shall we say the cultural arrangement between the Varger on Walston and the humans as like, well, they're dogs, so like,
right.
They're like, yeah, whatever, who cares, so what, so like, yeah, okay, woof, we're your pet, whatever, not like that, but like they kind of keep to themselves, and he doesn't, the way he ran it and the way I ran it too, I think he did a better job than I did though, is that he didn't run it as like stupid stereotype like racism. It was more kind of like a maternal paternal, like, good boy, go over there,
right?
Why don't you go, hey, why don't you go over and fetch something, or you walk into the room and the Varger's not going to get talked to,
right?
And I would share that with that player, just this is, when you show up and you realize you're like, oh, it's one of these worlds.
Right. Well, between that and then Seth also having the suggestion in his video of running it with the idea that this is a very low population world, that everyone is their cousin's brother's nephew's best friend. Like, though, I think between those two, it's going to make it a very interesting situation.
I did that, and that's how my buddy John ran it as well. And that, in a way, I think refreshingly flies in the face of your typical vibe of your high-tech sci-fi society. No, it's like it's like Walston is, it's like this, they're a bunch of bumpkins. Yeah, I would run it more like a, maybe this is stereotypical, like your tiny little Midwestern farm community with which you are,
I know rather well.
You are quite well acquainted. I would treat it like that, because you have players who will recognize that, and then it's not this, it's not the typical, like, I don't know, sci-fi vibe. It's something that they can relate to. Now, back to the prep thing. Like I said, you know your players, you see where the transition points are. Like I said, I personally in this adventure would lean more toward driving them in a lane, not on a rail, within the plot.
Right.
You have the fact that the great thing about Traveler is that they have to pay for lunch. They have to pay for their supplies. They're they have a job to do. And so it's not this open-ended issue, maybe even something on the front end, plug in some kind of a little bit of time pressure so that they do not dawdle, so that they move. Now, one thing about the adventure, and my buddy John and I, we both nixed this, and I don't remember if Seth recommended nixing this. The long, boring trek out to the ship, I would nuke that. I would either handle it narratively, or I would give them an in to get friendly with one of the locals and like have the mayor like loan him his like truck or something like that so that they can get there a little faster. If you read in the adventure the description of the overland journey and all these rolls to move up the mountain and all the thin air and stuff like that, you're just like, why this is really it's very tedious. So if there's one place in the adventure I would move along, and that's another thing also, when you're talking about session prep is, if there are parts in a published adventure that you just think aren't all that interesting, and if you think that's interesting, go ahead and do it. But if there was a slow part in the module, that's it. Yeah, I would move that along.
Okay. Well, there is one thing that I want to ask, and this is something that I think generally new GMs, if they've played before, they definitely know this is an issue. If they haven't played before and they're just getting into being a GM, this will come up pretty quickly. And that's naming characters and how many NPCs should I name? Should I go into that? Do I need to prep for that? Or do I just do what the kind of trope of, no, I make it up in the moment?
No, you know what? And this is something that I tell myself to do, and I do not do nearly as often as I should. Okay. What I would do is I would go to like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, one of those three, and I would say, I need 10 male names, 10 female names, and take some of the names that are in the module already and say, come up with X many names that sound somewhat like this. It's okay to reuse last names because some of these people are related. Right. Even just say, hey, this is for a science fiction role-playing game adventure, which takes place on a somewhat like medium technology backwater world where most of the people are related, not inbred. And I need a list of people I can use. And there you go. And if you take that list and you assign them already, like here's the tab, or you literally just go up, that's the first NPC I need. It's, Flibble Dark, Flimbledopper or something like that, whatever. Right. I actually did that. The last time I ran Traveler, I needed a bunch of ship names and I wanted ship captains because there was like a fleet action part of the story. And I went to ChatGPT and I told boom, and it just spit out a bunch of names that, because it knew what Traveler was, and I was asking for Imperial stuff, it spit out all these things that made sense. And some of it required a little tweaking, but I would do that. And just check those off as you go, or just maybe have the name, like maybe even print it out as a table. And have the NPC name and then have its role as you assign them so that you can write it so you can come back to it. Because the other thing that's really groovy about Traveler and like District 268, which is the subsector where Walston is, it's a backwater. It is a generally Imperium controlled, but not officially part of the Imperium. And so you can get into all kinds of trouble and adventures and like quasi-lawless activity there. And if they do become big damn heroes on Walston, then they might go back. So I would do that.
Perfect. That's kind of the area that like I'm not worried about. It's just something that's like, I know that's something that I always like question when I was playing, like how much prep did they put into that before we got into it? But that helps a lot with
I think
figuring that out.
There are great uses for like AI systems for doing grunt work. And I think that's one of them. I totally think that's one of them. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, are there anything like, okay, so we figured kind of about names, but is there anything else in a session that we really like I should spend a significantly larger portion of time figuring out? And then is there anything that I should like, you think that's going to be difficult, but it won't be once you're in the session? Because
this is the first time you're running it, all right, and it's the first time everyone's playing it, I would, for the first session, you know your players, but you don't know exactly how far they're going to get. And so the idea of reading the whole module before you run it is important for the reasons that we already talked about. I would make sure to review beyond a scene or three beyond what you think is the maximum your group is going to get to, just so you're not like, oh crap, you know. And it's also, I think it's perfectly reasonable. Like if you've been playing for a couple of hours and they get to beyond the bleeding edge of what you're prepared for, and you just don't feel comfortable, just say, hey, listen, I'm really sorry. I'm just not prepared, and I don't want to do a crappy job. So you just bring the curtain down for that session. But yeah, I would prepare beyond. It's like teaching class. You always prepare more stuff because the last thing you want is dead air. So the other thing, though, I would focus on is I would look at what, as you're looking at, this is what I anticipate we're going to end up doing. Obviously, you're going to start the adventure. They're going to get to Walston. They're going to interact with people at the downport. They're going to interact with people in the main city. Like at a minimum, your party is going to get through that, right? And chances are, the times that I've run this, chances are they're going to get to that next city where they interact with the government officials and they actually are told the full deal of like, well, this is where the ship is and those people were a-holes, but since you say you're not them, okay, we'll cut you a deal. I anticipate that your players will probably get at least up to that point. You know, and maybe then you think like, okay, depending on how long we're going to play, maybe we break at them borrowing the mayor's truck and driving up, you know, to the mountainside to go find the ship. You know, and then that forms a good like break between that and the next session. What I would do is look at what you anticipate you making it through in the first session and be clear that you are clear enough on the rules you need to know to do that.
Okay.
You're not, unless things go wildly off the rails, you're not going to have a fight.
Right.
But you do need to know the basic skill roles, the basic task resolution. And with Traveler, remember that these people are supposed to be like at least moderately experienced professionals. And so you only call for a roll when the outcome is in doubt, there is pressure, or the situation is like dangerous. If it's not, and they have adequate time and they're not under pressure, and the character has the skill, don't ask for a roll. But be clear on, okay, I think that, you know, whatever, this might happen, my play, you know, be clear on the core task resolution mechanic, which again is very simple, and reiterate to them like, hey, listen, we're really actually not going to roll that often. In combat, obviously, lots. In like starship stuff, lots. But in regular interactions, not necessarily a whole ton, but you probably will do some rolling in that first session. And so I would be clear on the core mechanic. I'll dig around. I'll dig around and look because I have a ton of like PDF reference sheets for Traveler and stuff like that. But I would also not burden yourself because this is your first time out of the gate with this. Don't burden yourself with the responsibility of like, I have to understand all of this. I would not burden yourself. It's not worth it. The core mechanic, how do you resolve a skill roll? That's it. Another thing that you might find interested in and value in is the idea of effect and task chains. I think that's a mechanic that I think is interesting and it makes sense. Go look it up. You know, the idea like if you or you could either do this individually as a character or have multiple characters working together, that one success impacts the next attempt in something. Like, hey, we made nice with the mayor over this, and so now that we're in the mayor's truck and the mayor's kind of put his like, you know, sign, you know, his stamp of approval on us, when we go over to this other place to ask for help, the kind of interaction, the role that would be part of that, we would have a positive benefit. We'd have a benefit for that because of this. And so I think that first sessions are great for the absolute rock bottom core mechanic. And part of that core mechanic, I think, for Traveler that is very clever and pretty simple is the whole idea of a task chain. So I would introduce that and be clear on it. That's it. You're not going to, I mean, I'd be shocked if you had a fight.
Yeah, I really hope we don't for what I'm planning for the first session, but we'll see. And as you suggested last time we were together, I have it kind of set up that hopefully there's a possibility that there could be no fights unless they choose to allow something to happen the way that I have it planned.
Yeah, I
So,
would. The place that I would do. You have a great action scene or couple of
mm-hmm.
action scenes in the last act. You have a bunch of that in this adventure. You could have an outright fight, physical or gunplay, by having a party of scavengers try to beat them to the ship. And they're just like, scumbag locals. You could do that on purpose so that your players are like, oh, that's how combat works.
Right.
And it doesn't also have to be a fight to the death. They're not goblins. They might just run
Right.
away after you shoot at them or shoot at their feet or something like that.
Which is going to be interesting because that's one of the things with this adventure that I really like to introduce the law levels that they have to check basically all their weapons that they just spent all their money on at the start of the session at the starport. So that'll definitely be an interesting thing to see them like, oh, we just spent all this money on getting these great weapons and then I can't carry any of them.
Yeah. And the challenge then is I have to solve the problems. I can't just like fantasy my way through it. I can't just destroy it and now the problem is gone. I actually have to think through, what would I do if I were there and I had these skills? But yeah, core mechanic, task chains, and then like I said, if later on, if it seems like it would give them a shot in the arm and give you an opportunity to know how personnel level combat works, you at least throw that in. Maybe it's a fist fight, maybe someone fires in the air or something like that. Whatever.
And this is just a quick traveler question that I think feels like in that with the task chains and effect. What are your thoughts on Boon and Bane dice that they have in there? Have you used those?
Not as much as I probably should.
Okay.
I think that, and for those of you who have no idea what that is, in Traveler, you roll 2d6 and you add a couple of static numbers to it. That's it. You're trying to meet or beat a number, basically a difficulty task or class. Boon and Bane allow you to roll a third die. And if you have Boon, that means like there's some kind of positive circumstances surrounding your attempt, and you take the two higher of the three dice. Bane is something,
It's the same thing, but you take the two lower.
Correct. So in effect, it's kind of like advantage, disadvantage. But
that's what I was going to say. Is it feels that way, but I wasn't sure with what you have played because my experience, advantage I think is given out sometimes way too loosely, whereas Boon and Bane it seems a little bit more controlled. Okay. So that was my question.
Here's what I would do. Given your players and this transition from 5e, what I would do is I would, at the front end of the session, remember how the core mechanic works. Just go over it really quickly. Just explain it to them again. And then say, hey, listen, there are two other aspects of this core mechanic that are really important and are really interesting and maybe kind of sit beneath the waves in this system. One of them is this idea of a task chain. Okay. And effect can be part of that. Okay. And now outside of combat, effect is primarily narrative.
Right.
So putting that aside, but I think that's important. Then the other thing is this whole idea of Boon and Bane. And what I would do is I would use Boon and Bane as incentives and disincentives to work within the lane that is Traveler. And that doesn't mean like wear someone else's clothes and act like them. It just says take the time to know what this is. What can you get from this? You can reward your players who take their backgrounds and attempt to interact with the world in a way that makes sense and say, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. Okay, you can go ahead and roll with Boone.
Right. And then you can then use Bane on the opposite of like, you're really going against what a real Traveler would do in this situation.
Well, you show up, you act like you piss off the mayor, you act like a jackass or something like that. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to roll with Bane. And here's why. I would do that early on, not only to teach the mechanic, but also to reinforce like the vibe and the tropes. Reward them when they are clever in ways that fit within the world and the story.
Great. That was exactly what I wanted with.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Totally. Actually, that's a great question because that's such a simple that's such a simple. I mean, it is like an advantage or disadvantage, but it's such a simple way to like wave a flag to let them know.
Right.
Yeah, this is the way it can be. This is what makes this game special and different.
Right. And it gives you that opportunity to be like, you don't even have to say it outright all the time. You can just be like, they come up with something particularly clever. Yes. And you're like, I'm rewarding you for being clever.
Right.
Continue to try to be clever. Don't just smack it with a hammer.
Right.
Go for the thing that's smart.
Yeah. Okay. One last thing about this adventure, and you won't get to this Friday, but my friend who's run it a couple of times, he always has you read to the part, there's like some animal that was left behind.
Yes, their dog.
Okay, he had it as a dog.
Right.
He just had it as a dog. It's just a space dog. It's just a dog. It's a regular old dog. And and he played that up as like, those scumbags left their freaking dog behind. And then the dog became like, the dog was like adopted by, but playing up the dog and getting the player, like if you have a player who really likes dogs, play up the dog it's clearly distressed. It's all ragged and thin and whatnot. Yeah, they freaking left their dog. And then you have a crew that then adopts the dog, and
Right. That's where I find it really funny how Mongoose tried to push that as one of the combat options. And I'm like, I don't see that happening with my players. As soon as I mention there's a dog bowl there, they're gonna figure it out.
Too much of an opportunity to create like a little bit of an emotional connection and have them like, okay, we got to work for this. Yeah. All right. This is good. This is really good. I'm really looking forward. Hopefully next week we can talk about how this went.
Yes.
Hopefully it goes well.
And that's where I'm really hoping this goes well, because it's going to make anything else that I do in Traveler a lot easier to plan for. Yeah. That way, if they kind of want to go off and do their own thing instead of moving into another kind of like published adventure after this, I kind of know the tropes and know where to go.
Crawl, walk, run.
Yep. Correct.
All right. Cool.
All right.
Good luck. Enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes.